Reid's days were a predictable rhythm of muted beige. His office, a cubicle farm where ambition was measured in spreadsheet rows, hummed with a low, constant drone. He was good at it, meticulous, his focus a quiet, unwavering current beneath the surface of routine. He found a certain solace in the orderly progression of tasks, the small victories of a perfectly reconciled ledger. Yet, beneath that placid surface, a determination simmered, a restless energy that often felt out of place amidst the fluorescent glow and hushed keyboard clicks. He craved something more, though he'd never quite articulated what that more might be. The call came on a Tuesday, just as the afternoon light began to soften the edges of the window blinds. His desk phone, usually reserved for inter-office queries, chirped with an unfamiliar external line. He picked it up, expecting a telemarketer. "Mr. Reid?" The voice on the other end was dry, precise, a lawyerly cadence. "My name is Arthur Finch. I'm the executor of the estate of your elder relative, the late Elias Thorne." Reid frowned. Elias Thorne. The name was a phantom, a whisper from the farthest reaches of his family tree, someone he'd met perhaps once, decades ago, at a funeral he barely remembered. He certainly hadn't considered the man a relative he knew. "I'm afraid Reid have some rather unexpected news," the lawyer continued, a faint rustle of papers audible in the background. "Mr. Thorne passed away last month. And, to everyone's surprise, he left you his primary residence." Reid felt a strange jolt, a ripple through his carefully constructed calm. "His residence? Where is that?" "A cabin, Mr. Reid. Deep in the Blackwood Forest. Quite isolated. The will specifies you as the sole inheritor. There are some details we need to discuss. I'm based out of an office in what was once a remote monastery, several hours north of your city. Can you make an appointment to visit next week?" The phrase remote monastery hung in the air, a peculiar anchor to an already surreal conversation. It painted an immediate, stark image in Reid's mind, ancient stone, echoing silence, a place far removed from the mundane world he inhabited. He agreed, a sense of unreality settling over him. The drive north was longer than he anticipated, the landscape slowly shedding its suburban sprawl for something wilder, denser. The highway gave way to state roads, then county roads, then finally, a single-lane asphalt strip that snaked through towering pines. The light filtered through the canopy in fractured shards, the air growing cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Reid felt the city loosen its grip, replaced by a growing awareness of the vast, quiet expanse around him. The determination that typically anchored him now felt like a fragile shell against the encroaching wilderness. He found the lawyer's office tucked away down a narrow, gravel lane, a stark stone building that indeed looked like it had once been a place of monastic solitude. Its windows were narrow, deep-set, and the heavy oak door felt ancient beneath his hand. Inside, the air was cool, carrying a faint scent of old paper and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like ozone after a storm. The meeting was brief, almost perfunctory. The lawyer explained the terms, handed over a thick envelope containing a key, a crude map, and a few legal documents. "It's quite rustic," the lawyer had said, his voice flat. "No running water, no electricity. The nearest town is a good hour's drive back." There was an unspoken warning in his tone, a subtle implication that this inheritance might be more burden than boon. The map, hand-drawn and faded, showed a tangle of unmarked logging trails branching off the main road, leading deeper into the forest. He followed it, the paved road quickly giving way to packed dirt, then to little more than 2 muddy ruts winding through an increasingly dense wall of trees. The canopy overhead was so thick it seemed to swallow the afternoon sun whole, casting the forest floor into perpetual twilight. He drove for what felt like an eternity, past trees gnarled and ancient, their branches draped with moss like skeletal arms. A prickle of unease started to spread through him, a subtle tightening in his chest. This wasn't just isolation, it was a profound sense of remoteness, a feeling of being utterly cut off from the world he knew. Finally, the track opened slightly into a small, overgrown clearing. And there it was. The cabin. It was smaller than he'd imagined, hunkering low amidst a riot of untamed foliage, as if the forest were actively trying to reclaim it. The windows were opaque with grime, reflecting nothing but the gray sky. A broken porch railing listed precariously, and the front door, a heavy slab of wood, was scarred and peeling. Reid cut the engine. The sudden silence was profound, almost deafening. He sat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, his breath shallow. The cabin didn't just look old, it looked forgotten, like a secret the forest had held onto for too long. The smell of damp wood, rot, and that same unidentifiable, cloying earthiness was stronger here. He walked towards the cabin, each step feeling strangely heavy. He inserted the heavy, tarnished key into the lock. It turned with a reluctant, rusty groan that echoed in the profound stillness. He pushed the door open, a cloud of dust puffing outward, carrying with it the scent of stagnation. He felt as though he had stepped not just into a cabin, but into a mouth, waiting to close. The phrase remote monastery had clung to Reid, a burr beneath his skin, long after the lawyer had concluded their business. It was a peculiar, almost archaic detail, utterly out of sync with the sterile, modern office and the crisp paperwork that formalized his inheritance. The shiver it provoked hadn't been of cold, but a deeper, unsettling ripple that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It suggested a world apart, a silence that wasn't merely quiet but absolute, carrying a weight of forgotten things. The journey to the cabin only intensified that strange sensation. The paved road dissolved into gravel, then into a pair of faint, overgrown tracks swallowed by the encroaching forest. The trees here were ancient, their branches gnarled like arthritic fingers, forming a dense canopy that filtered the afternoon sun into a perpetual twilight. The air grew heavy, smelling of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, a faint, metallic tang that made the back of his throat prickle. It was as if the forest itself held its breath. Finally, the cabin emerged from the gloom, a silhouette of weathered timber against the deepening emerald of the woods. It seemed less built into the landscape than grown from it, an organic extension of the ancient earth. The air was thick and stale, tasting of forgotten wood smoke and something vaguely acrid. He spent the first day in a methodical effort to bring some semblance of order, clearing cobwebs, sweeping away generations of dust, and opening windows that groaned in protest. The cabin, however, resisted. It held on to its gloom with stubborn tenacity. That evening, as dusk bled purple into the forest and the cabin settled into its own deep quiet, the first of the disturbances began. He was in the kitchen, wiping down a grimy countertop, when he heard it, a distinct, soft creak from the floorboards directly above him. He froze, listening. Nothing. Just the gentle hum of the old refrigerator he'd reluctantly plugged in. He dismissed it as the house settling, a natural consequence of age. It wasn't the distinct shape of a person, but a fleeting elongation of the existing gloom, a ripple that stretched and vanished before he could properly focus. He blinked, rubbing his eyes. Tiredness, he reasoned. The long drive, the unsettling quiet, the sheer effort of cleaning, it was all playing tricks on his perception. The next morning, the unease deepened. He had left his coffee mug on the small, scarred table beside his bed. When he returned from the bathroom, the mug was on the floor, intact, but definitely not where he'd placed it. He frowned, bending to retrieve it. Had he knocked it off in his sleep? Unlikely, he was a still sleeper. The explanation felt flimsy even to him. He decided to tackle the small, enclosed study, a room dominated by a heavy, dust-shrouded desk. It was barely visible, a hairline crack in the wood, but deliberate. Curiosity overriding his growing discomfort, he pressed on it. The panel slid inward with a soft click, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled in a bed of faded velvet, lay a heavy, leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle and yellowed, filled with dense, archaic script in fading ink. Beside it, wrapped in a scrap of linen, was a small, crudely carved wooden effigy, a figure with elongated limbs and a featureless face, its surface smooth from handling. As he lifted the journal, a faint, dry scent of parchment and something else, something vaguely metallic and earthy, wafted up. He opened the journal carefully. The first page bore a single, elegant hand-drawn symbol, a swirling knotwork design he didn't recognize. The following pages were filled with strange entries, references to the land and the pact, to the harvest and the offering. The words were fragmented, cryptic, hinting at rituals and obligations, a lineage stretching back through generations. A seed of doubt, planted days ago, had now taken root, twisting into a tendril of genuine fear. The remote monastery, the peculiar inheritance, the ancient cabin, and now this cryptic journal. They were all threads in a tapestry he was only just beginning to unravel, and he had a terrifying premonition that the pattern would reveal something far older and more sinister than he could possibly imagine. The shiver it provoked had been easy enough to dismiss then, a phantom chill. But back in the cabin, beneath the oppressive canopy of ancient trees, the shiver felt less phantom and more like a premonition. The strange occurrences, once sporadic and easily rationalized, began to quicken their pace. A week into his stay, Reid found himself constantly on edge. The gentle creak of settling would become a series of sharp, deliberate taps from the floorboards above, echoing through the empty upper story when he was alone downstairs. He'd tried to blame the wind, the house's age, even his own frayed nerves, but the rhythm was too insistent, too rhythmic to be random. One evening, a faint, sweet smell, like bruised lilies, permeated the air in the main room. It was cloying, almost sickly, and seemed to emanate directly from the hearth, though no flowers were present. He opened windows, fanned the air with a newspaper, but the scent lingered, a phantom perfume that tightened his chest. He remembered placing it there himself, a small, comforting presence. He picked up the wren, its smooth wood unnervingly cool against his palm, and stared at the empty mantelpiece. The subtle shifts were no longer subtle. They were deliberate, intimate intrusions. Reid couldn't simply pack his bags and leave. He felt a strange, almost magnetic pull to the cabin, a sense of responsibility he couldn't articulate. He needed answers. His distant relative's sudden death, the cabin's unsettling atmosphere, the lawyer's odd mention of a remote monastery, they were all threads in a tapestry he now felt compelled to unravel. He started with the few belongings his relative had left behind, a small, oak-bound chest filled with yellowed letters, a collection of local history books, and a single, leather-bound journal. The journal, its pages brittle, offered little beyond cryptic observations about the changing seasons and the resilience of certain root systems. But the letters and the history books proved more fruitful, if unsettling. The local history books spoke of the region's original settlers, a small, insular community, and their deep reverence, or perhaps fear, of the ancient forest. It described offerings left forth the forest spirit to ensure bountiful harvests and to ward off ill fortune. It spoke of a family, his own, who were the keepers of the pact. Reid's hands trembled as he turned the pages. His family. The keepers of a pact. What pact? He dug through the letters, many of them written in a looping, faded script he struggled to decipher. Most were innocuous. A handful, penned by an earlier relative, mentioned a recurring obligation, a tithe to the land, and the growing burden of their sacred duty. One letter, dated nearly a century ago, spoke of a desperate plea for guidance, a journey to a place of quiet contemplation and ancient knowledge, a place that sounded remarkably like a remote monastery, seeking counsel on how to manage the escalating demands of their oath. He learned that the land beneath the cabin was not merely a burial ground, but a focal point, a nexus where the offerings were made. His distant relative, it seemed, had been the last in a long line of caretakers, burdened by a legacy he had perhaps tried to escape. The letters alluded to a growing impatience from the entity, a malevolent presence that demanded more, and a final payment that was due. The sudden, mysterious death now felt less like an accident and more like a consequence, a payment exacted. They were escalating demands. The entity was stirring, its patience worn thin, and Reid, the newest inheritor, was now its focus. He wasn't just living in a strange old cabin, he was living in a cage, built on a foundation of ancient fear and a terrifying, unfulfilled promise. The question was, at what cost?